Hey, people, welcome back to the Max Goodwin YouTube channel, and something a little bit different is the return of a series I tried to do at the beginning of the YouTube channel. That is tier list. Obviously, we all bloody know what a tier list is. You got S, A, B, C, D, etc., or your different labels or whatever. And I thought I'd bring it back with a bit more pizzazz than the last one. It's probably my most viewed video on the channel, actually. Somehow the algorithm loved it. It is an awful video though, so if you want to check it out, it'll be in the icon above with the rest of the playlist. Today, we're going to be ranking every Premier League manager for the 2021 Premier League season. Okay, and here it is. This is our tier list. It was very kindly made by D_Jota20 on Twitter. So this is it. I've changed the labels to ones that suit what I'm looking for specifically. Got all the managers in order, except for one, which is Big Sam, because this was made obviously before Big Sam was appointed, and I can't be bothered to go get all the photos and make my own tier list. So we've got Slaven Bilic here. Just imagine that's Big Sam there. It looks exactly the same. They're both identical. It's fine. It's fine. All right, so let's get into this thing then. Let's start with Arsenal and Mikel Arteta. And for me, I think he's probably going to go into the B category, probably towards the top of the Bs. Don't get offended, Arsenal fans. He's all right. He's not bad. Obviously, won the FA Cup in his first season in charge of Arsenal. Seems like he's probably going to be an all right manager. He's just, I think, going through quite a sticky patch at the moment with Arsenal. I think that's a bit of an understatement, a bit of a sticky patch. But, of course, lost a lot of games this season. Currently 15th in the Premier League and recording this on the 17th. So they've just drawn with Southampton yesterday in the league. It's quite a small sample size, of course, so you can't really give him too much B for that. But I'm going to stick him in B towards the top. Next up, we move up to Birmingham and Aston Villa, and specifically Dean Smith. I'm going to be sticking him in the C tier. Obviously, S being the best, then A, B, C, and then Bin. Bin for me is like, just should not be in the Premier League. I think Dean Smith's an alright manager. I think he's maybe Premier League quality. He's got a lot of good qualities about him. He can definitely coach an attack, as you can see with Ollie Watkins and Jack Grealish on fire at the moment. I do think, though, particularly after last season where they only just survived in the Premier League, he's got a lot of upside, obviously, promoting youth. Obviously has a connection with the club, being a Villa fan himself. But his downsides are defensively, they're not the best. He's obviously only just avoided relegation last season. They're doing all right this season, although I do think a big part of that is due to the quality of players like Jack Grealish, Douglas Luiz, John McGinn, Ollie Watkins. Their recruitment's been good, and he's a solid C middle-of-the-road manager. Next up, we have got Graham Potter, obviously the manager of Brighton and Hove Albion. I would put him straight in the A tier. For me, the most underrated manager in the Premier League at the moment. I will sing his praises all day long. He has been exceptional with Brighton. The job he's done with that team to make them a competent Premier League team. Obviously, it's a great match because they're a team noted for having quite good recruitment. You look at some of the players they brought in the last couple of seasons, I think it suits Graham Potter and his style to a T. So he's going straight in the A tier, probably towards the bottom of the A tier in fairness, but definitely an A tier manager. Next up, we've got a man who's currently in the relegation zone. That is Sean Dyche from Burnley. I'm going to be sticking him in the B tier. He'll probably be towards the lower end of the B tier though, because I don't think he's better than like Mikel Arteta or a few of the other managers I've got down for B tier at the moment. I definitely think his level is higher than relegation though, so if Burnley do go down this season, do expect him to stay in the league. Maybe if one of the relegation fodder from this season sack their manager, I do think he'll probably end up staying in the league this season. So Sean Dyche, solid B, maybe towards the bottom end, but solidly in there. Next up, we've got Super Frankie Lampard, of course, the massive Tory, who is a Chelsea legend, of course, Chelsea manager at the moment. I'm going to stick him as well in the B tier, probably towards the top of B tier. I do think he's probably better, certainly from what I've seen so far, than Mikel Arteta, if I can get him there. There we go. So we've got Mikel Arteta below Frank Lampard, just basically because Lampard's got a bit of a bigger sample size. Did a great job with Derby, of course, getting them into the playoffs, losing in the playoff final to Villa, I believe, and then moved to Chelsea, 4th in his first season, currently 3rd or 4th at the moment at the time of recording. Done a great job at promoting youth in the team, looking at the likes of Reece James, Tammy Abraham, and a couple of the other youngsters, Billy Gilmore, of course, as well. I think he's got a lot of well-rounded facilities in his managerial repertoire. Decent pressing coach, got some good pressure numbers. Defensively, a couple of issues when you've got 36-year-old Thiago Silva holding your defence together. I've got a couple of questions to ask about that, so definitely B tier, pushing towards the A tier. I think he's got a lot of potential as a manager at the top level, in my opinion. Next up, we've got Roy Hodgson, a pretty solid manager. Obviously, has managed Liverpool, Fulham, West Brom, Inter Milan, England, of course. And I think his gaffes as a manager, saying the likes of Roberto Carlos would never be a left back, obviously putting Harry Kane on corners for England, I feel like they outweigh, or they sometimes outperceive his ability as a manager. I think he's an exceptionally, competent coach, very good manager. I'm going to put him towards the lower end of... So yeah, I'm going to put Roy Hodgson up in the B tier, probably towards the lower end. There are definitely a lot more talented managers in the league at the moment than him, but definitely a solid B tier manager, surely. Next up, we jump from C to E and up to the northwest with Everton and their manager, Carlo Ancelotti. Of course, formerly of Milan, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Napoli in recent years, and now the Everton manager. I'm going to put him in the A tier, low end of A tier though. I think I don't know if you have peaked as a manager, but he's definitely past that. I was expecting a lot more from him in his first season in charge when he took over from Marco Silva. I certainly don't think that the team looked much better under Carlo than they did under Marco Silva. But he goes up into A tier because of what he's done this season. Obviously, bringing in, having that pulling power, I think is a great credit to him as a manager. Having the likes of James Rodriguez, Alan and Doucouré coming in the midfield. I feel like that pull of a manager is quite an important ability, that man management ability, I suppose that comes under. So just for that, really, he at least deserves to be a B. And then obviously coaching the team to some good results this season. That 2-2 draw in the Merseyside derby, probably being the best of them. So I'd say low A tier, upper B tier. We'll be generous. We'll give him A tier. Next up, we have probably one of the newer managers in this tier list, that being Scotty Parker, the current Fulham manager. I'm going to pop him up in the C tier, probably lower end C tier. I'm really not that convinced by him this season. I think they've been very lucky, Fulham, that the recruitment has been really good. The likes of Anguissa and Lookman looking like really good signings. Obviously, Anguissa came in a couple of years ago, but they are looking particularly solid. I think he's definitely got talent. Whether he's an upper Premier League manager remains to be convinced for that. Defensively, they look a bit shaky, and it took a complete overhaul of that defence with new signings. I believe all four of their main backline now with new signings in the form of Anthony Robertson, Toshin Adebayo, Joachim Anderson, and Ola Aina. The fact that the signings are really paving over his cracks as a defensive manager are quite telling. So I'm going to put him into the lower end of C. Definitely not in the bin, but C, pretty safe, really, there. Next up, we've got Marcelo Bielsa, of course, the manager of Leeds United, one of my favourite managers in the Premier League at the moment, and we're going to be sticking him probably towards the top of the A tier. So here we go, sticking him in the A tier. I think he's probably better than Potter, probably the best manager we've had so far. Of course, famous for his very nomadic career as a manager, the likes of Athletic Bilbao, Marseille. I believe he was a Lille manager for a bit. This is currently, I believe, with Leeds, his longest tenure in a job, which I think says quite a lot considering he's only been there a couple of years. For me, best manager so far that we've done. Obviously, an absolute innovator when you have the likes of Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp saying that you're an inspiration to you as a manager. I feel like that's a telling sign of a manager who's got a lot of influence in the game. Obviously, his man-marking approach, where his players literally man-mark at every point of the game, the extreme level of pressing, the interplay midfield, makes their teams very enjoyable to watch. So Marcelo Bielsa, high A tier. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so next up we have Brendan Rodgers. And I'm going to be sticking him in the low A tier. I think he's a very good coach. Again, pretty underrated, I think, because of his time at Liverpool. He's been overlooked at times because people think, well, he's not very good because with that team, he couldn't get a Premier League title. His time at Celtic has really rebuilt his career. Of course, with Leicester this season, they've been a bit up and down. They had a really good string of results and then had a really awful performance against Everton at the weekend. You know what, in fact, I'm going to drop him down to the Bs. I think I'm going to put him top of the Bs. He's good. He's a solid manager, of course. I think easily in the top 10 Premier League managers at the moment. It's just whether he's that man to take Leicester to that next step that they clearly want to do. Obviously known for having quite good possession stats, getting the best out of Jamie Vardy at the moment. He's been a pretty good manager for Leicester. He's had some good high points, that 5-2 win over Manchester City in particular, but it's whether he's good enough to take him to that next step. So I'm going to put him in the high echelons of the B tier. Okay, so we're halfway through our Premier League managers and we now move into the current reigning, defending, conquering Premier League champion, that being Jurgen Klopp. The former Borussia Dortmund manager is, of course, going in S tier alongside Pep Guardiola, the best manager in the league so far at the moment. What he's done with that Liverpool team is obviously exceptional in the way that he's built a team basically around fullbacks and a good front line and a one world-class defender. Of course, with that team that he's assembled, the likes of Mo Salah, Roberto Firmino, Sadio Mane, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Virgil van Dijk. There's been a lot of spending at the club, but then again, they've lost a lot of big players. That 120 million that they lost for Philippe Coutinho, invested so well back into the team, buying pretty much Alisson and Van Dijk after his departure. I think he's been an astute manager who's put in some great performance, particularly this season with the likes of Van Dijk and Joe Gomez out of injuries. I think he's definitely got to be up there as one of the best Premier League managers of all time. So I'm very happy to put him in the S tier right now. Okay, so next up we have got Manchester City, the two-time Premier League champions under Pep Guardiola, 100 points during that 17-18 campaign. We're going to be popping him into the S tier alongside Jurgen Klopp. I'm probably going to put him ahead. I do think that Pep is better than Jurgen Klopp just because of that long sustained period of success that he's had at Bayern, at Barcelona before then, obviously now at Manchester City. I just think that longer period of success than Jurgen Klopp's had just makes him that little bit better of a manager than me. He always had the upper hand of him in Germany. Jurgen could never win the Bundesliga when he was the Bayern Munich manager, and it took a pretty underwhelming season for Manchester City last year for Liverpool to win the Premier League. So I do think he is better than Jurgen Klopp as a manager, but it's certainly very tight, and it's definitely an interesting battle that we'll hopefully be seeing unfolding over the next couple of years. Okay, so we move from Manchester City to their cross-city rivals Manchester United and their Norwegian manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. For me, he is the classic example of the former player brought in on a name to manage the team and not really having the credentials for the job. I think personally when he came into the club he should have just been given the contract at the end of the season, and they should have looked to get Poch out of Tottenham or someone along them lines, maybe Conte when he departed from Chelsea or Allegri from Juventus. I think he should have been the temporary interim manager and that's it, because I think he's starting to sour his name a little bit. Obviously finished third last season, although a big part of that was down to the arrival of Bruno Fernandes in January. And I don't think that Ole's necessarily a bad manager. I just think he's a little bit out of his depth at Manchester United. So I'm going to put him into probably the B tier, I think. Okay, so yeah, we're going to pop him into the B tier, probably between Lampard and Arteta. Now, I'll put him below Arteta because I do think Arteta's probably shown glimpses of being probably a better manager than Solskjaer. And I certainly think with the team that he's got over Arsenal and what Arteta's currently working with, it's a lot more impressive what Mikel Arteta has achieved in his time than what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has achieved. So solid mid-table B, not really any better than that though, I think. Okay, so next we have got Steve Bruce of Newcastle. And unfortunately, he is our first in the bin manager. He should not be anywhere near a Premier League team in this day and age. Seems like a lovely guy. He's obviously a Newcastle fan from being a child. But for me, he just shouldn't be managing in the Premier League in 2020 with the talent currently in the Championship, with some of the talent out in other leagues at the moment. For Newcastle to be bringing in the safe pair of hands in the form of Steve Bruce. Personally, for me, he is probably the worst manager in the Premier League at the moment. So I'm going to put him in the bin. I don't really want to talk about it anymore because I've got a lot of family who are Newcastle fans. So I don't want to upset them any more than they probably are watching Bruce Ball on a week out basis. So in the bin goes Steve Bruce. Okay, so next up we've got Chris Wilder, currently manager of the bottom place team Sheffield United, although I don't think that necessarily justifies his abilities as a manager. I think I'm going to put him in towards the lower end of the Bs. I think as a coach, he's exceptional. He's obviously got an exceptional bond with his players. having come up from League One to the Championship to then the Premier League. It's very similar to the Eddie Howe situation. I think at the club, he is like a cult of personality almost. Everything at the club goes through him. However, I do think that is slightly coming to the detriment. I do worry that maybe it'll be again an Eddie Howe situation where he doesn't really know when enough's enough and when he should maybe leave the club. I certainly don't think he is worthy of being relegated with Sheffield United. They're definitely not the worst team in the Premier League at all. They've been unlucky with some injuries this season, I think particularly Jack O'Connell's injury and the fact that really they don't have a particularly competent striker to go up front. I do think it's derailed their potential of building on what was a really impressive debut in the Premier League last season. So I'm happy with him in the B tier. Towards the lower end, you could maybe even be an argument for the C tier, but we'll put him in B. We feel a bit generous today. Let's move on to our next manager. Okay, so we now move into the Austrian super Ralphie Hasenhüttl, the manager of Southampton. And for my money, the best manager of the season. I think he's definitely in the running for manager of the season award already. I'm going to put him in the top end of B. Again, you could definitely make a case for him going into the A category. I would like to see him maybe win something with Southampton or see where they finish at the end of this season, because it's easy to see how somebody could say, well, it's just a really good run of form at the beginning of the season. Of course, off the back of last season, during the post-lockdown period, they would have been in the Champions League places, as I very emphatically stated during my Premier League predictions. So I definitely think he is a top quality manager. His ceiling's definitely higher than what he's currently at with Southampton. I definitely think if Arsenal were looking at getting rid of Mikel Arteta and starting another project, or if Manchester United were looking at getting rid of Ole, I think he would definitely be a interesting candidate for the job, shall we say. With what he's done with the likes of Danny Ings, James Ward-Prowse, Oriol Romeu, Carl Walker-Peters, turning quite average players into, top half players who are easily worth more than they bought them for. They're definitely looking like the Southampton that they were about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a bit longer, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And it's really exciting to see because they're a club who have done some exciting things in the past and I think are looking to do some of the same in the near future. So Ralph Hasenhüttl goes into the B tier for the moment. All right, so next up we have got the special one, the manager of Manchester United, former Champions League winner, Jose Mourinho. For me, he is going straight into that S tier alongside Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola, though probably the worst of the three, which is not really that much of an issue. I think he'd probably take that. So yeah, we're going to pop him up in the S tier, just below Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola. I definitely think in terms of management in the Premier League, there's Jurgen Klopp and Guardiola, and then quite a gap, and then the likes of Jose, Hasenhüttl, Ancelotti, Potter, Bielsa, sort of in that next echelon. I do think of them, though, that Jose's the best. Obviously, he's got probably the best pedigree of the lot. Arguably, you could say Ancelotti, but of course, won the Champions League with Porto, famously won the league with the likes of Chelsea and Real Madrid, won the Europa League for Manchester United, and turning Tottenham into a title contender, which with the squad they've got at the moment is a very impressive feat. So yeah, very happy with him sitting in the S tier at the moment. Alright, so next up we have got Big Sam. Unfortunately, I couldn't get around to changing the photo to Big Sam, so it's still Slaven Bilic. So bear with me with that one. Just imagine it's Big Sam though. I mean, they look pretty identical, of course. So we're going to be putting Big Sam in the bin. The fact that he is managing a Premier League team in 2020, again like Steve Bruce, it's not 2010 anymore. He just shouldn't be in the Premier League managing teams. Sure, he did a great job with Bolton and Blackburn. He was all right with Crystal Palace and Everton. But the fact that he's managing a Premier League team in this day and age for me is a worrying sight. He'll probably save them for relegation and they'll probably just bugger off afterwards, which that's exactly what you get from Big Sam. You save from relegation, he buggers off after the season, and then hopefully then West Brom can appoint someone a bit more interesting. There's definitely some great managerial talent in the Championship. Of course, in Europe, there's some really interesting managers who could be appointed. Do what Southampton did. Do what Brighton did. Get an interesting manager in there. Don't do a Fulham. Don't do a Newcastle. Don't get a safe pair of hands. Get somebody interesting in there because as Premier League fans, that's what we want to see, obviously. Okay, so we've just got 2 managers left, and they are both the West teams. Firstly, starting off with West Ham United and Big David Moyes. I think he's found his level with West Ham, a mid-table team pushing towards the European places with quite a bit of ambition. I think with Manchester United, he was out of his depth and didn't get the time to implement the system that he has. And I think with Sunderland, it was very much the opposite, but very similar. He didn't get the time to implement the system he wanted to put in place. I think with West Ham, he's landed at a team with ambitions and with some really good individual players, but needing that glue to hold the team together that I think they get from David Moyes. So I think solidly towards the sort of middle of the B tier for me. Yeah, so we're going to pop him in the B tier, probably ahead of Sean Dyche, but maybe below Ollie. He's definitely at his level with West Ham. They could probably push towards Europa League football this season, I wouldn't be surprised, but they're certainly not any better than that. And the individuals in that team have certainly accommodated that this season with the likes of Jarrod Bowen and Pablo Fornals, Thomas Souček and Declan Rice in that midfield, having particularly impressive seasons. And their signing seems to be a bit more intelligent than they have in recent seasons. So I think, yeah, solidly a mid-table manager and solidly in the middle of our tier list. Okay, so we've got our final manager in the tier list, that being the manager of Wolverhampton Wanderers, Nuno Espirito Santo. For me, I think he's probably a bit overrated. He's definitely a good defensive coach who's obviously assembled a very good defence in his team. But for me, I just don't rate him that highly. I think there's definitely a lot more talented managers in the Premier League at the moment. For me, I rate him probably in the same sort of ballpark as the likes of like Ollie and David Moyes. So I'm going to put him above Ollie, behind Arteta. He's a fine manager and what he's achieved with Wolves is obviously exceptional, but you've got to look at the fact that in the Championship when they got promoted, they had Diogo Jota and Ruben Neves. In their first season, they signed Raul Jimenez and João Moutinho. Like, you've got to give him some credit, of course, for achieving these feats, but you've also got to look at the fact the amount of money that they spent and the connections that the team has. Obviously, when you have João Moutinho, Ruben Neves, Diogo Jota, Daniel Podence, Raul Jimenez, Connor Cody in your team, Rui Patricio in goal, obviously you're going to be an upper mid-table team pushing towards the Europa League spaces. So he's done his job in getting them to that place, but if they want to move on to the Champions League places in the next few years, I definitely think there are better managers out there, particularly in the Premier League, than Nuno Espirito Santo. And that's it for the tier list. As you can see on screen, this is our final assembly in the tier list. In the S tier, we've got Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp and Jose Mourinho. In the A tier, we've got Marcelo Bielsa, Graham Potter and Carlo Ancelotti. In the B tier, we've got Ralph Hasenhüttl, Brendan Rodgers, Frank Lampard, Mikel Arteta, Nuno Espirito Santo, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, David Moyes, Sean Dyche, Roy Hodgson and Chris Wilder. In the C tier, we've got Dean Smith and Scotty Parker. And in the bin, we've got Steve Bruce and Big Sam Allardyce. What do you think of the tier list that we have assembled today? I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you want to go have a look at it yourself. Again, thank you to DJota20 on Twitter for getting this tier list together, making my job a lot easier, not having to go out and get the photos of each manager. Obviously, apologies that Big Sam is not a picture on there, it's still Slaven Bilic. So again, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Go try it for yourself. It'll be down in the description of this video. Make sure you at me on Twitter with your results for your tier list. We do have some exciting videos coming out over the next few weeks during the Christmas period, so be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe down below, turn on notifications, and until next time, I will catch you later.